Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this interview with His Excellency Mr. Amre Moussa, former Secretary General of the Arab League and former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Egypt. It's a real pleasure to welcome you today, Mr. Moussa, and on behalf of the Sciences Maroc Association, I would like to thank you for your time and for agreeing to exchange with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to join you.
Thank you once again.
Okay.
It's a privilege to have you, Mr. Moussa.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. During your long and rich experience in diplomacy and politics, you have been, among other things, representative to the UN, ambassador to India, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Secretary General of the Arab League, candidate for the Egyptian presidential election of 2012, and President of the Constituent Assembly of 2013. Throughout your mandates, you have notably been a strong supporter of the Palestinian cause, of Arab unity, of the peaceful resolution of conflicts, and of the respect of the sovereignty of nations. So, before I give the floor to our moderator, Ryan, would you like to share with us a few moments of your career that may be interesting for students of political science and international relations?
Yes, indeed. As you know, my career or my CV is well known. And before the end of my career as an ambassador, I was ambassador to India, then the ambassador to the United Nations, then the foreign minister of Egypt for 10 years, and then the Secretary General of the Arab League for 10 years, after which I entered into the political arena in Egypt and in the Arab world, the Middle East in general. I ran for the presidency in 2012, as you have said. I didn't make it, but I continued to be a player in the political scene in Egypt and in the region in general, and in fact, with a lot of connections, contacts, and associations with several banks in Europe and in America. I am really interested in the international situation that has adversely affected the multilateral system and affected that system very seriously to be able to save the planet, not only from pandemics, but also from the climate change. We have a chance to renovate the international system, rehabilitate the multilateral system. But so far, nothing happened yet. And this is a big question mark to all those who study political science. The multilateral system, its fate, its replacement, its new shape, process of renovation, or a process of replacement. In my opinion, renovation is the wiser approach. And all of us in universities, in think tanks, in the civil society, international civil society, we should support this kind of approach. The multilateral system is indeed in dire need to change the way Security Council is working, and also the General Assembly. But the international system as a whole, the multilateral system as a whole, is not that a failure. In fact, if you look at it from another angle, you will find that a lot of successes have been achieved by that system. This is only by way of introducing the discussion before we start and before your moderator takes the lead in this evening.
Thank you so much, sir. It is a perfect way to introduce our discussion tonight. As you said, your career is very well known, and you touched on several aspects that I'd like to highlight throughout the interview. But I think we'll start with this notion that has really founded the basis of much of your work, which is that of unity and cooperation between states. And so I suppose our first question to you is, how do you assess the current state of unity between Arab states, the cooperation between Arab states in 2023, and how do you assess the challenges facing this cooperation and unity?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, the issue of Arab unity itself needs redefinition. It's not a question of unity the way Egypt and Syria united back in the late 50s and early 60s. But it's a new style of unity. Cooperation, planning together, using all our resources in a way that would lead to a better life for all the inhabitants of our region. If you are talking about the Arab world per se, we have more chances now to work together than before. We have seen a lot of mistakes, a lot of actions against policies against the Arab world. No problem, not a single one has been resolved. Although big powers have been involved in the Middle East, but they couldn't, or they were not willing to push things to reach a solution and a fair solution. In fact, we in the Arab world believe that now is the time to call a spade, but in a peaceful way. We cannot continue the way we were. The international pressures will take a different shape. The way some Arab or all Arab countries, but some of them, let me say, several of them, follow the policy of yes, sir, to the big powers. Yes, sir. Okay, we'll do. I don't think this will take place again. The public opinion is fully aware of the negative results of the intervention and the interference in internal affairs of the Arab countries, of giving the bad advice, of steering the matters to suit the big powers, but not the countries in the Middle East. We are still injured. I'm talking about the public opinion in the Arab world, about the Arabs, about they are almost 500 million. What happened in Palestine or to the Palestinians is a case in point. But it is not going to end that way anyway. We are still on the road towards a solution or a catastrophe. So we are trying to avoid the catastrophe of confrontation. That's why I think that the time has come for the Arabs to sit together and talk about the future of the Arab world and the future of the Middle Eastern region. Added to the Arab world in that region, I would mention Iran as a very important Middle Eastern country. Turkey is equally important, very important Middle Eastern country, and Israel as a new country in the region. And as we in the Arab world, we have mentioned, we have stressed the fact that we are ready to normalize relations with Israel. If Israel is ready to normalize relations and also cooperate truly in the solution of the Palestinian question, because there can be no stability or peace without solving the Palestinian question. There cannot be. So we have to discuss, we should promote a process of peace that is really called the process of peace, not imaginary, not a movie thing, but a real process of peace in order to reach our goal in a stable Middle East. When would that happen? I believe we have to start now, despite the fact that the current government of Israel is not ready to talk peace at all. But there are also some wise people in Israel that would see that the time has come, the moment is to have meaningful talks, negotiations with the Arab countries, perhaps with the Arab League itself, to discuss and agree on a future plan for peace and regional cooperation. But this cannot happen without solving the problems of the Palestinian state and the Syrian Golan Heights, occupied Golan Heights. But with Iran, there are a host of other problems too. The situation in Lebanon, the situation in Syria, in Iraq, and several other areas that Iran has, in particular, in my opinion, to reconsider parts of its regional policy. That the most recent exchange of relations between and Iran is a door that is now open for talks about, positive talks about a better future for all of us. Accompanied to that is the exchange of contacts between Turkey and Egypt. And this is also a very important step to normalize the situation in the Middle East. So there is a place for optimism, as there is also an equal space for pessimism. But all of us, you included, in the political science world, that we have to help and insist on a meaningful process of peace, general process that would include everybody, Turkey, Iran, Israel, and of course the Arab world, in accordance with international law, in accordance with the principles of good neighborliness, good governance, and that is a positive note I wish to introduce to our discussion.
You said something I thought was quite poignant during your explanation, which is that it's time for the Arab states to come together, to sit down, and to call a spade a spade. And we've seen that in some sense, the Arab League is considered to be a major vector or a principal vehicle for this sort of discussion, for this sort of cooperation. And given your experience within the institution, a very extensive experience, how do you assess the recent valuations over the past 10, 15 years, recent evolutions over the past 10, 15 years? And what are your projections? What are your predictions for the next 5, 10 years as an institution for the Arab League?
Well, the Arab League reflects the situation in the Arab world. If the Arab world is in a state of conflict, then the Arab League will, among themselves, then the Arab League will suffer from that. But the Arab League will have to play a role in order to soften the relations in the Arab world. But with the problems we have mentioned, like the Israeli policy or Iranian policy or Turkish policy or even the Arab policy, all of them will have to be put on the table in order to work together and lessen the tension and start talking reason, be it the issue of Iran in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, or the Israel in Palestine, in Syria, and in the neighborhood in general, or Turkey in northern Syria and in northern Iraq and other areas, and the Arab world, having historic relations with Iran and Turkey, could really sit at the table and discuss such issues. As for Israel, in fact, it's a different situation. Israel was not there all the time as Iran and Turkey and Egypt and Arabia and so on. But we have to find a way to sit and talk. The issues of 23rd century, 21st century issues are very serious, and we have to avoid the recurrence of a Cold War and invasion and wars on the one hand, and to unite our efforts to meet the new challenges like pandemics and the climate change and so on. There are chances, as I'm saying, but there are, of course, obstacles, major obstacles. Why I welcomed to meet with you today to discuss that issue. What is your role? I believe that now in the 21st century, there is something important, very important, new, important thing, that science is moving very quickly. The artificial intelligence and the repercussions built on that, that is now 23 years after the start of the century. What about 20 years hence? Instead of 2023, say 2053. How would the world look like? That's your word, by the way, not ours. So we have to be aware that there are certain dangers, even with the science, even with the new discoveries. This is, we have to get to be very serious in projecting, in looking forward. What will happen if, and how would we deal with the current problems? International cooperation is a must, but as you see, as you all see, I believe that we are not witnessing an international atmosphere that would lead to such a cooperation. In fact, the international atmosphere, the atmosphere on the international scene, leads to a lot of fears and negative projections. Wars, as what's going on in Ukraine or in the Pacific at a certain moment, or as you see with the occupation in the Middle East, with in Palestine and the settlements, and the not a single day goes by without casualties. And look at Libya, look at Sahel, look at the Horn of Africa, look at certain spots in Asia. All those things would lead to a situation or a world full of problems, and does not talk to powers do not talk to each other, trying to build a new system, build a new world. So what kind of policy we should adopt? We should recommend the political science world, the civil society, international civil society, because now it's not only the states, as the system built in 1945 and the charter has stressed. Now it is not only the states, but states and also the international civil society, the non-governmental world, the think tanks, the universities. The world is ours, all of us, not only governments, but also the civil society organizations, and the like.
So in the context of what you've just said, that these are global problems, these are problems that will require the cooperation of several large powers. Talk about the big powers and the relations between each other. Again, given your experience in the Arab world, in the Arab League, in Egypt, how do you consider the development of relations between the Arab world? And of course, we know that it's not a monolith, that the states have their individual will, but between the world, the Arab world more generally, and other large regions, other large political conglomerations, for example, the United States, for example, the European Union?
Well, the United States is the most important country in the world. And the wise policy, a wise line of policy, would be how to build positive relations with that superpower. So it is in our interest to have the best of relations with the United States. And there are, of course, differences of views, but those differences of views should be put on the table and talked and listened to carefully by the big power, and for the other powers in the Middle East and the Arab world should listen to how the US would think its policy should be in the 21st century. But my point is that the US is the most important country in the world, and we should not just turn our backs to the US or vice versa. We have to try to plan to work for establishing a policies of relations of trust, of confidence with the US. Exactly like Europe. Europe has an additional advantage, is that they're our neighbors. The Mediterranean Sea is ours and their neighbor, their sea. And there are historic relations between Europe and the Arab countries, even the African countries too. So we have to try to put the train of relations with Europe on the right track, that the relations of the days of colonization and the days of one side very strong and the other side very weak are over. We have seen in Africa how what happened with France. Several African countries in their relations with France. The message was very clear and still very clear. All countries, including Arab countries, say now we have to rebuild the relations. As we talk about rebuilding international system, we have to rebuild the relations between Europe, America, and the Arab world, Middle Eastern world, and the African world. That also applies to the other side, to the East, China, Russia, etc. China is a power that is moving steadily to the helm, either to share the helm of the international scene. They have their own projects and their own logic and their own interests. We have become, in the Arab world and in Africa and several other countries in Latin America and Asia, we see that we have become experienced with how to deal with the bigger powers. The issue of colonization is out of the question. The Chinese have offered a new logic based on win-win. And the vehicle for that is their initiative, Belt and Road, if you heard about it. Of course you have heard about it. So China with projects, but discuss that with the country concerned, that they agree on the priorities, but also many countries need infrastructure. China has different views. Okay, that you need those bridges and you need those infrastructure projects. We are ready to it, no conditions. We're not talking to you about how to manage your country, what is the system you can adopt. There is a new approach, still saying that the 21st century has introduced new ways of discussion and even new problems that we have to deal with it. The pandemic that all of us witnessed and lived, the climate change, the Cold War, and the even hot war as in Ukraine, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, even threats of use of nuclear weapons. All such things, in my opinion, are the negative side of in the process, which make it a must that we have, all of us, big, small, rich, poor, east, west, north, south, to sit and see how are we going to manage this kind of a situation, very threatening situation, and give chance to the positive part of it to advance and succeed.
When we talk about these global discussions and these global issues that involve several regions of the world, one issue that is seemingly unavoidable is that of the Palestinian question, that of the issue of Israel, which has, of course, formed a large part of your work and of your career and of your political activism. According to you, point blank, is a peaceful solution still possible to the Israel-Palestine question?
I hope it is still possible, but all indications now, with the use of violence and the proliferation of settlements and the unstable situation in Jerusalem, the way the mosque is being treated with the invasions and the demonstrations and the army in and around the mosque, there is nothing clear about possibility that Israel would accept the two-state solution until now. There is no formal position declared by Israel to accept that they accept the two-state solution according to what we have agreed on in Camp David on the 22% of the old Palestine territory. The government the current government in Israel, many around the world and in our region believe that it is very difficult to reach a solution with them. If a two-state solution is difficult or impossible, then one state, but one state with the right of citizenship, equal right of citizenship. There is no first class, second class, and so on. I don't think the world would accept an apartheid policy in the 21st century. It cannot be accepted. So Israel is definitely cornered. They hate the two-state solution, but they hate one state because it will not be a Jewish state as they hope. It is not, the complications do not come from the Arab side. In fact, it comes from the Israeli side. But I here acknowledge the existence of a core in Israel, Israeli society, Israeli civil society, and some political circles that do work for and talk openly about the two-state solution and reaffirm their commitment to this solution. Would they be able to convince the governments of Israel, the rest of the Israeli society, that this is the best solution for their peace themselves? I don't think so, and they do not think so. I talked with many of them. They say how difficult it is with the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his current friends and colleagues in the government, that they are not really ready to talk peace according to what we all talk about, Palestinian state, equal rights, and things of that kind.
I want to turn the conversation a bit here back to your work in the Arab world and in the Arab League. And I want to touch on perhaps the most important event for the past 2 decades. You, of course, found yourself at the head of the Arab League towards the beginning of the Arab Spring, 2011. Was this movement a surprise to you? Were these events shocking? And how do you read this movement now, more than a decade later?
I want to say that it was expected, and it was an open secret. Not there was a lot of literature about changing the Middle East. You must have read about large Middle East, wider Middle East, bigger Middle East, new Middle East. That's the talk of the neoconservatives in America. But a new Middle East cannot be used by a group of people in the western side of the Western world. talk about changing a whole region. The whole region has changed, but I want you to know that it was a kind of a fellow travelers policy. People were dissatisfied with their governments. There was no, in large part of the Arab world, there was no good governance. What happened that you called Arab Spring, I don't think you will find an Arab that would say that would agree with you that there was an Arab spring. We talk about the Arab autumn, Arab winter, things of that kind, because the change, while it was the right of our people and young people, they wanted to affect that change. They wanted to change the situation. That is the population and the young people. You have seen Al Tahrir Square and how it was constituted. Who were there? The young people. This was enough to change the system. But the foreign hand has introduced a very negative aspect, that the change became negative, it became violent, brought in new groups that seized the opportunity, but couldn't perform, couldn't change. The situation in our region, the Arab region, is based on the necessity of change. We cannot live in the 20th century while we move to the 21st century. And we were ready to effect that change. The lack of good governance became something that everybody, every single man and woman in the Middle East, in the Arab world, has seen it, has touched it, has been affected by it. So change was there. Change was there. It could have been a democratic change, by the way, because people in the street are talking, governments are leaving the scene, others would come, that would come through elections. And that's what happened in Egypt. The departure of President Mubarak was followed by a transitional period of a year or two, then elections to elect a new president, and a new president was elected for Egypt. That's with the Muslim Brotherhood. But their year of governance was full of mistakes, of inability to act properly as a good government. What do we need? We need to correct the mistakes of the past. We need to look into education, to look into the healthcare, to look into the young people and how to promote their personalities, and give them a better future. And none of this was there. That's why people wanted them to leave. 1 year was more than enough for so many people. They were elected, that's right, but they acted in a very, very negative way because they did not respond to the needs of the population for a positive change of governments and to move towards good governance. And all indications were that, no, we are moving in the wrong direction. So the net result of the so-called spring, Arab Spring, is what you see in Libya, what you see in Tunis, what you see in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, and that was because of the foreign intervention that made such a spring move to be a winter.
Could you perhaps elaborate for us a little bit? I know that in the wake of these Arab Springs, we won't call them an Arab Spring anymore, but in the wake of these uprisings, of course, we saw an opportunity for intervention in Libya. And if I'm not mistaken, you took a stand against this intervention, which is in line with your more general position against the intervention in the internal affairs of states. Do you think that this is a principle this principle of anti-intervention that's being violated more and more frequently? And if
yes,
so,
it has been.
please.
Of course. You see now the Ukraine is not only the Middle East now. There are tensions in so many other regions, like the European one, Eurasian one. So it is our predicament in the Middle East has been not only transferred, but is moving to cover more areas and more regions. There is a general state of dissatisfaction around the world, a state of tension around the world. So if we talk about the Middle East alone, you cannot correct the situation while the neighborhood is in disarray. There are wars. There is the food crisis. The economic cooperation, the economic trade has been affected. The trade has been affected, and many other things. So the situation needs deeper thinking. The Middle East is a hot spot, but Eurasia is a hot spot too. And God forbids things would happen in Asia and in the Pacific, so it will be the hottest spot again. And as you see in Africa, in Sahel, in several areas, also big problems and hotspots, and what should I call them? The mercenaries are around, military mercenaries are around in Africa, coming from several directions. So we have to be very cautious at this juncture of the international relations and of the developments in several regions, including the Middle East, including the Arab world. We have to be cautious.
So, of course, we must be cautious of the neighborhood, as you said, falling into disarray. So I want to tackle two issues a little bit more specific to the Middle East in this context, two more internal issues. The first, I want to get your opinion. Is Islamism as a social force, as a political force, still potent in the Middle East, and does it constitute a threat to the modern Middle Eastern state?
Look, yes, indeed, this is a matter that has to be discussed about the future of the religion and politics. Now, and after the departure of Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt, from governing Egypt, ruling Egypt, it was clear that a new trend was in the offing. That is, let us not mix religion with politics. Saudi Arabia now is witnessing a new approach towards the religion, its place in the society, its interpretations. There is a renovation in the world of Islam. And the most important thing to renovate the interpretations, the thinking, etc., within a religion is to have it by its people, out of their conviction that let us talk again about how to practice this, to do that, etc. Never through pressure from outside. The anti-Muslim or the attacks against Islam and its principles against the Quran, etc., is unacceptable, and it would add to the threats to stability and of promoting better relations. Yes, indeed, we are discussing a new thinking within the Islamic confines. We are discussing that, as I told you, in Saudi Arabia, is going on now. In Egypt, it already started in 2012 or 2013. And this is the new trend. The religion is to be respected, and God has to be respected, and but to rule governments, to rule states, and talk about tourism, about trade, about this is politics. And this has to be separated from, this is the new trend in the Muslim nations. But we cannot allow and cannot absorb the way some circles in the West talk about Islam, promote Islamophobia, burn the Quran, all those negative things should stop, because the more they stay, the more anger would grow in the Muslim world.
I think that answer is quite clear and quite well justified. So I want to move to a second key issue in the Middle East, and it's an issue that touches, I think, Egypt especially. We've seen in recent years a growing conflict over access to water, especially in the context of the and the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam affecting Egypt. And we see that this resource is becoming, in some sense, a geostrategic, a geopolitical weapon. How do you evaluate this development, and how do you evaluate this development, especially in the context of the Middle East?
Well, this is not the Middle East. This is Africa and the Middle East. The issue between Ethiopia and Egypt, and the issue between Turkey and Syria and Iraq, the issue of rivers emanating from a certain spot under the sovereignty of one side, and the rest of the rivers under the sovereignty of other sides. Now, there is a real problem on the issue of water. Boutros Ghali, former Secretary General of the UN, used to say that we have witnessed wars because of oil. Next century, we'll witness wars because of water. And we have to be aware of that thing. It is impossible, for example, for Egypt to live without water coming through the Nile for millennia now. The issue with Ethiopia, with the Renaissance Dam, is not day to day, or when things are fine. Rain is heavy, water, a lot of water, so water will flow usually, as usual. But the problem comes when there is drought. So there is no water to Ethiopia or Egypt or other. Here is what requires a deal between all the states concerned, that in such a situation, we should do 1, 2, and 3. To refuse that is to wait for the problem. And then when it comes, things will be, because it's a question of life or death of countries and societies, millions of people. So the best thing for us and for the political science students and think tanks and so on, to prepare the ground for an understanding about the worst case scenarios. We have to avoid to reach a worst case scenario. In such cases, it looms there, it is over there, perhaps a bit far from where we stand today, but the worst case scenario is somewhere in the air. We have to avoid moving towards it or reaching it, because there is still a chance to say, all right, under such dire circumstances, let us make deals. What I should do, you should do, etc. That's what I can say on the issue of water for the time being. Because we are at the beginning of a very, very serious episode.
Well, if I can make a reference based on that to another state that is, of course, affected by this conflict of water, let's talk about Morocco, which is, of course, the subject of our association here. I want to quote you from a speech that you gave at the 11th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues. I think it was last year. And you said that it is undeniable that Morocco is in a constant movement towards the future. How do you assess the economic, sporting, and technological developments that we've witnessed recently in Morocco? Is this a good omen for the region and for the Arab world more broadly?
Yes, I believe, of course, it is a good thing to see Morocco doing its best to prepare for the future with the solving the problems and trying to get ready for the crises that are being expected, like the issue of water, for example. And I believe that in the recent years, including this year, rain was not that active in Morocco that has affected the reservoirs of water, and now promoting the desalination projects. No, Morocco, in fact, shows a lot of positive activities in changing the infrastructure and rebuilding the country. And in this, Morocco has established a lot of positive relations with the rest of African countries. I hope that this will be the case in narrowing gaps and rebuilding approaches within Africa to avoid more conflicts and avoid a future full of problems. Now, Morocco is doing fine.
Having done a sort of a flyover of the region, I think it would be interesting for those watching, for those listening, to know if, given your long and distinguished career, you have a single instance, a single moment, perhaps a highlight, a challenge that you've overcome, something of that sort, that could bring us a lesson as students of diplomacy and international relations.
Well, let me say, without necessarily asking this very wide question, everything that happens in the world now affects all of us. World War II or World War I, many countries that were not European countries, many countries around the world were just following the news as if it is something that happens very far from us. But let us follow what's going on. What did Hitler say? What did Churchill say, etc. Now, Russia, Ukraine, NATO are confronting each other in Eurasia. But it has resulted in food problems, economic problems, stability problems. Even the international relations and the UN system has been affected by by those developments in a certain area. Let alone if the confrontation between China and the United States takes a more concrete shape, which will be a catastrophe. So my point is that we are concerned wherever we are in the world, with whatever conflict that happens anywhere in the world. It's not a matter of East and West. It's not only them. We, in the rest of the world, will have to be there. Our voice must be heard. To change or renovate the international system, it has to be the work, a cooperative work of all of us, big and small, north, south, etc. As I've said. Those changes, expected changes in the international scene, must see that the African world, the Asian countries, the Latin Americans, and everybody have been consulted and have been invited to the table where major issues are being discussed. The new system, new international system, will have to address this point. I don't think we in Africa or others in Asia or in Latin America or even in Europe will just sit waiting to hear the news of what have they agreed on. That's not the case. It will not be that. Many of us now are thinking of a new non-alignment in order to play a role in the conflicts between big powers. Many of us also are thinking of the new basis for a new international system or renovated international system, rehabilitated international system. Like the issue of veto or the issue of double standard. Double standard has really affected the stability and justice and fairness in the world. It has tarnished the international system, the multilateral system. The multilateral system has been tarnished, lost confidence, lost support because of the double standard that we have seen. So there are certain things, certain new issues, new principles that we have to probe and put before us and try to highlight the road to the future in accordance with that.
Well, as you've just said, this international system that we're living in is characterized by new issues, by new questions, by new dynamics. I suppose if I could pose you a final question, do you have, given this notion of complexity, this plurality of the international system, could you perhaps provide some advice for students of diplomacy, for those interested in international relations, for today and for the future?
Well, I believe our discussion now, what I have said, sheds light on that issue. My first point, as I already mentioned, is that the 21st century is not only for states to decide, but the international civil society must find its way, its place in this new approach towards the future. The international civil society is full of organizations working in all walks of life, economic, social, legal, political, security, and so on. Those organizations will have to come together and decide to give their advice and let their voice heard by the other powers that believe that they have the right to decide for the rest of humanity. This is the language of the 20th century, not the language, it should not be the language of the 21st century. And this is another advice that I believe you or all of us in the political science world will have to bear that in mind. The third issue that I would put before you by way of what you call advice is that to follow very closely the issue of renovation of the international system. In my opinion, the international system was not all bad. The UN composed of several organs, all the specialized agencies of the United Nations, UNESCO, ILO, WHO, etc., World Food Program, UNICEF, in a very good and positive way, effective way. So this is the part of success of the United Nations system, the multilateral system. The other side is the international security system. That's the Security Council and General Assembly. The Security Council has failed. Now it is a fact. We cannot say that it would or it may have been. No, it has failed. It cannot solve any problem. The Security Council contribution is really very minimal nowadays. Why? Because of two things. Number one is the veto. Three things. Number one is the veto. And the veto is paralyzing the Security Council. Number two is the composition of the council itself. 15 countries out of almost 200. So we can talk, you can talk, the political science students can talk about, okay, what should we do on the issue of veto and on the issue of the composition of the Security Council. The third point is about the double standard. Double standard that considers the nuclear situation in one country as bad. The acquisition of a certain country of nuclear weapons is very bad, while the acquisition of another country is fine. But this is a double standard. And it is very apparent in the Middle East. Now, we call on Iran not to acquire nuclear weapons. And we are right. Iran should not acquire nuclear weapons. But what about Israel? Why should Israel acquire nuclear weapons while Iran is not any other country? Why? This is double standard. That is why the public opinion in the Arab world do not give a damn of that policy of denuclearization, because it is incomplete. It works on the level of double standard. Iran, for many Arab countries, has to stop or to change, to reconsider its regional policy. In Iran, in Lebanon, Syria, etc. We don't talk to her about the nuclear weapons. This is for some big powers, but the question remains. While I say again that yes, indeed, Iran should not acquire nuclear weapons, but I say that Israel should not acquire nuclear weapons either. This is just to highlight the problems that we face. So in as much as we don't differ about the necessity to that Iran doesn't move to be a military nuclear power, but what about the other country? What about Israel? You see how it is double standard and unconvincing. You cannot convince us. You see, or you yourself you cannot be convinced if we are talking about the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. So we support the proliferation on one hand and refuse the proliferation on the other hand. Those are issues that I put before you to discuss in a quiet manner. It's not a question of confrontation, but how to deal with such double standards and the problematic issues that cannot but hinder the developments towards a better system and a better world.
I suppose that if there's a key takeaway for students of diplomacy and international affairs, it resides in what you've just said. In fact, there are several points of discussion to be raised. And of course, there's nobody more qualified, more capable to advise in this department than His Excellency Mr. Moussa. Therefore, on behalf of Sciences Maroc and on behalf of the students of Sciences Po, Your Excellency, my colleagues and I thank you extensively. Firstly, for your time with us today, but most importantly, for the experience that you have been so generous to share and for the wisdom that you have undoubtedly imparted upon us and all those listening. It has been a privilege and an honor to speak with you today, and I sincerely hope that we will be able to maintain contact for the future.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.